Hello and welcome to your first video lecture for U.S. history, and I am making it, this is current, this is happening right now. Just a quick note, not only do you need to take notes on this because I will check in your notes tomorrow, but there's also going to be at least one question on your notes review quiz that's sort of like a close listening question. Because when you're listening to a lecture, you need to be paying attention to what's presented on the screen, in this case, in this PowerPoint, but also what the presenter is saying. So if you can do that, you will earn some extra points. So this is about European colonization from about 1492 to about 1660, talking about Europeans showing up in the New World. So the first thing I think we need to talk about is why colonize? Why would anyone want to do this? One of the major reasons why colonization happens has to do with an economic theory that emerges at this time called mercantilism. Say it with me, mercantilism. The easiest way to explain mercantilism, I think, is this lovely picture where you have a mother country who sets up colonies in other parts of the world, mostly to enrich itself. See how enriched this particular lady is. So you can see in this case, her maids, her colonies are bringing her things like gold and silver, foodstuffs, raw materials, and this is exactly what is going to happen with the colonies that are set up in North America by various European countries. So this is a little bit different from the colonialism that you maybe talked about in World War I, leading up to World War I last year in world history, but essentially, the whole purpose of these colonies are to make the mother country richer and fitter and happier. And there's a couple other reasons as well. So often when we talk about causation and we talk about movement in history class, we talk about push factors and pull factors. There are a lot of things that are pulling people from Europe to North America. The 3 G's are often talked about in terms of European colonization. Those are God, gold, and glory. So people are at this time still trying to find some sort of trade route to India and China that kind of fits in with an additional reason maybe why they're doing that. But they're also, starting with Columbus's voyage to the Caribbean and to Jamaica, they're realizing there's a lot of mineral wealth in the New World. The Aztec Empire, the Incan Empire have really found a lot of gold and silver and mined it and are very obvious about having it. There's a lot of shiny bling going on in those cultures that Europeans see and then desperately want because those are valuable all over the world. So they're looking for gold. Literally, they're also looking for other things to make them rich. They're looking for God. What does that mean? This has to do with some of the people who are going to the New World. Many of those people are going to convert people to the Christian faith. Remember, this is not terribly long after the Crusades have happened. There are a lot of people going to find converts to their faith in the New World. And then the idea of glory is just kind of, you potentially get to go and start a new life in a new world. You may earn fame. You may earn notoriety from your exploration. The flip side of that is that other people may try to take that away from you, like we saw with the Columbus letter earlier this week. But that might be interesting to people. And there's also this promise that maybe you have land there. Maybe land is up for grabs. If you don't have any land in Europe, this might be a really attractive place to go and try to set up your own farm, set up your own estate. There are also a number of things that are pushing people maybe out of Europe as much as those things are pulling colonists to the New World. One of those has to do with just the way the economy is set up in Europe during this time. I know you guys talked about feudalism last year, where there is kind of this narrow pyramid, right? So like, if you maybe remember this from last year, you have a feudal lord up at the top, you have sort of these layers of people in between, and then you have a whole bunch of commoners down at the bottom who just don't have very many rights and are maybe not very satisfied with their place in society. So if you can get out of that pyramid by maybe going to a different part of the world, that would be really attractive. There's also a practice in Europe during this time called primogeniture. This is it right here. This really limits the options for men in families that maybe do have land. So say if you're in one of these sort of middle classes in Europe, the primogeniture says that if you are the oldest male heir in a family, you get everything. You get all the land, all the goods, all the money, which is great if you're the oldest, but not so good if you're the second or third or fourth or fifth or seventh or 12th child. There's no reason maybe for you to stay in Europe. So that would be another reason why maybe you would be looking for land in the New World. And then finally, Europe is just not a fun place to live in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. Yes, the Renaissance is going on, but there's also a lot of death, disease. There's a lot of internal strife, civil war going on between different city-states. People are besieged all the time. It's just generally a difficult place to live. And so if people are looking for maybe an easier path, some things might suggest to them that the New World would be a place to find that. So let's talk about Spain. All right. So Columbus sails to America on behalf of Spain. He himself is Italian. And by the mid-1500s, Spain, the Castilian crown, has set up, as you can see, a large colonial empire in what will eventually become Mexico, the American West and Southwest, parts of northern South America as well, and the Caribbean. So, after Columbus, some of the first explorers who show up in these parts of South America are successful largely because they're able to topple some of the existing civilizations that are there, including the Aztecs in Mexico, who starting in 1521, Hernan Cortez absolutely, he besieges the city, ends up killing their king, Moctezuma, and then kind of driving the whole civilization into the ground from there. The Incan Empire in Peru lasts a little bit longer until another Spanish conquistador, Francisco Pizarro, shows up there in 1572 and drives them into the ground as well. After those civilizations are gone, there's some parts of them that remain, both in the Aztec and Incan situations. If you were, again, kind of a low caste member of society, you didn't have a lot of status, maybe you didn't have a lot of land, you would pay some tribute to the king in that particular civilization. And the Spanish adopt that in the New World. They set up what's called the Encomienda System, where the Spanish crown agrees that they will set up their conquistadors as sort of new leaders in the New World. And people will have to pay them tribute in either the form of money, gold, or in labor. So a lot of people end up working essentially as slaves for their new Spanish overlords pretty quickly after the Spanish show up in these parts of the world. This is kind of gives you a sense of how the Encomienda system ends up working out for people. Ideally, it would be a good situation where these lords would take good care of their laborers, because obviously if you treat your laborers so badly that they can't work anymore, you don't get their labor. But as you can see from this delightful woodcut, maybe the Spanish were not treating people particularly well. So those of you who are down on Columbus and what he brought to the New World are probably reacting to descriptions of this sort of situation. So who are these people who are coming in and settling in Spain? They're a mixture. Some of them are conquistadors, right, who are professional soldiers. They have military training, and they are literally there as almost an army unit to kind of take over populations. A lot of them are also Catholic clergy, meaning priests in training, people who are there maybe for those religious conversions that we talked about. Religion is going to be a major banner for Spain. They want to convert people to Catholicism in the New World. And also, if you notice, soldiers and clergy during this time period, those are going to be almost all men. There are very few women who are coming over from Spain during this period. Why are they settling? They're motivated by the mineral wealth, the gold and silver of these areas, possible converts, and later sugar is going to be a major crop that ends up getting planted throughout the Caribbean and South America. Sugar is very labor intensive to produce, but that's going to be something that a lot of people go over to set up sugarcane fields, and make their fortune that way. Spain is also not limited to just South America, Mesoamerica. St. Augustine in Florida is actually the oldest continually inhabited place in the United States. I believe it's settled for the first time in the 1530s. And Spanish conquistadors are going to go throughout the American Southwest as well. It's likely that the first Europeans who saw the Grand Canyon were Spanish. The other kind of major difference between the Spanish and some of these other European groups is that they intermarry with the native populations in these places where they are settling, as well as the slaves that they bring with them. So there's a whole class of people who are called mestizo, meaning mixed race, that grows up in these areas, and sort of a racial caste system that develops in these areas as well. We'll talk more about that in the weeks ahead. All right, so we did Spain. Now we got to talk about France. So as you can see, the French colonies, the French holdings in the New World are pretty extensive. And during this time, France also is colonizing a lot of parts of Africa, and you can see India and East Asia as well. So important places to think about. France is the major North American holdings are going to be in the Caribbean, but they also end up settling most of the territory that is today Canada and parts of the upper Midwest as well. Where we live in Illinois likely would have been under French control at some point. This whole area of sort of northern North America is called New France, starting at about 1534, when Jacques Cartier, who is one of the first explorers from France who goes to this territory, ends up sailing down the St. Lawrence Seaway and kind of paving the way for his countrymen to follow him. And they set up a series of forts all along this area that are mostly made for accommodating the fur trade. Fur, meaning like furry woodland creatures that are running all over the place in the upper Midwest. Fur becomes the hot fashion accessory in Europe for a couple hundred years, and there's a lot of money to be made by trapping, skinning, and selling off the pelts of animals all over northern North America. And they set up these forts that maybe have familiar names to you. Places like Détroit or Saint Louis or Baton Rouge, which are all French names for Red Stick. St. Louis, Louis is the King of France. Detroit, I'm not sure what Detroit means. You can ask your French teacher, but obviously these are names that are still around today. These are still cities that have grown up out of the remains of these French forts that were established all the way back in like the 15 and 1600s. Cadillac, in fact. A lot of the things that come out of places like Detroit, cars, often take their names either from French names or from the Native American names of the people who the French were doing most of their trading with during that time. Pontiac, another good example. So, who were these settlers? They're, again, a kind of mixture of people. There's, instead of the conquistadors like we have in Spain, we have people who are called coureurs de bois, people who are literally running through the woods. That's what their names mean. They are kind of these nomadic fur traders that are working throughout the region during this time. There's also, again, Catholic priests looking for converts, right? The Jesuits send huge numbers of people in to try to convert people in New France. They have a very different approach than the Spanish, who are kind of forcing people into conversion. The Jesuits end up modifying a lot of their Christian practices so that they kind of fit with the existing belief structures of the Native American groups who they are most in contact with, which is kind of interesting. So there's a process of acculturation that is happening in North America, where two cultures are kind of colliding with each other in the French parts of North America and changing a little bit as a result of that clash, instead of one culture kind of taking over the other. Again, the French are going to marry native populations. They're also going to form military alliances with native populations, and they also have a group of people who are called Métis, who are also sort of mixed race. They are part European, they are part Native American, and they are going to be, in many cases, leaders throughout the society in New France. It's left to talk about England. As you can see, England has colonies in North America, much less land than Spain and France at the outset of things. Tomorrow, we are going to talk about who is settling in these areas, but I just want to review. We have New England, we have the Middle Colonies, and we have the Southern or Chesapeake Colonies. Tomorrow, we're really going to focus on these two regions. I also want to point out just one thing that emerges from the British relationship with the New World, which is the triangle trade. I know you guys have talked about this before. Just a quick refresher. This has to do with raw materials that are being harvested in North America and that are being sent back to the mother country, right? This mercantilism idea where raw materials are going back to make the mother country richer. Mother country can use those things to make beautiful tables, right? And other manufactured goods, and then sell those to their colonists, right? So everyone gets nicer stuff. Maybe everyone gets a little bit richer, but the big beneficiary here is going to be England. You'll also notice this little portion called the Middle Passage, right? We can't mention the triangle trade without talking about the Middle Passage and slavery. Slaves are going to be brought from the coast of Africa, mostly through the Caribbean and into parts of South America as well, really during this period. But starting in the mid 1600s and going all the way up to about 1820, there's going to be significant numbers of African slaves who are imported to do work in North America as well. We'll talk more about that another time.